Hi, I'm Tracy Clark. This is my Culminating Experience video. I apologize. It feels really inauthentic to be reading, but I know my thoughts won't go together well if I'm just talking to the camera. I'm better with the camera, but my eyes are going to be sideways. So my apologies to begin. My reflection on being a multicultural educator. So a great thing about being an educator is you never stop learning. I think about my experiences in my short 48 years on this earth. I'm glad I've continued to challenge myself. I challenged myself by being the only one in my teeny tiny high school with 200 students to attend a college 3.5 hours away. I challenged myself by going to graduate school for college student personnel, the first person in my family to get a master's. It was during that time I really began my work on my personal identity development, understanding white privilege, learning about systemic racism and all the other isms and what that meant for me as a person. At 21 to 23 years old, it seemed overwhelming to do all of those things. But I was lucky to have really culturally competent advisors in Deanna Forney and Dr. Tracy Davis, who courageously walked beside us as we unpacked all that information, all the cognitive dissonance and struggle of what it meant, and finally, how to integrate that to be social justice advocates. At that point, I thought, great, put a bow on it. I've arrived, I'm an ally. I'm here to advocate for marginalized communities, yay. So I went on to work at colleges and universities for 10 years. I challenged myself to be a faculty member when I worked at UNLV in the leadership program, teaching leadership classes, and even facilitating a cultural leadership retreat and working in the tunnel of oppression. It was awesome. In this work, I found, guess what? I still wasn't done learning and growing. My students challenged me. My coworkers challenged me. Everything challenged me, which is a beautiful thing. So there was still work to be done internally and externally, obviously, in the world that I lived in. I took a lot of time off. I had my first daughter and I looked to her and I said, nope, not going back to that place, not going back to UNLV. So then I was a stay-at-home mom for 14 years. And through a divorce, I embarked on a new career as an elementary education teacher, teaching at a Title I school for the last 2 years in a first grade classroom. When I was a mom, I threw myself into being a mom. It was my identity. I ended up homeschooling my girls after my second child was born at 2 pounds, 10 ounces. We were in the NICU for 3 months and I learned her lungs were really compromised. So I made the decision to continue homeschooling my oldest into kindergarten and first grade, and I worked with my youngest when COVID happened. I thoroughly enjoyed seeing them, most of all, learn to read and write and make meaning in the world. When my third child, a surprise little boy, was born, I recognized something was really different in his development, because by the time he was 2, he still wasn't speaking. He had no impulse control. COVID was upon us. My ex-husband was worried about me taking him out of the home. He didn't think it was safe. For once, I did assert myself, my own power, and told him I didn't care. I was taking our son for a speech evaluation. Finian did have significant speech delays. After a year of speech therapy, my internal mom, spidey sense, said something was off. His impulse control was through the roof from when we woke up till we went to bed. Broken things. He would throw his hand on the table and everything would fly off, pulling his sister's hair. I couldn't go to the bathroom. I knew something was off and I noticed fine motor and gross motor delays. He just wasn't doing the things his sisters were doing. I got him evaluated again at TikTok therapy with an occupational therapist who diagnosed him with sensory processing seeking. Basically a child who can't get enough sensory input, enough noise, enough chaos. So I was a bit of a chaos coordinator. I didn't know Finian, through this process, would be preparing me to be a future better educator. I'm grateful for the experience as a special needs mom. It's made me be more inclusive and compassionate for students with different needs. I had 7 students that were in speech this year, and I was a great advocate, but also not, because when they asked me, do you hear speech problems? I would say no, But again, my lens is very different as an educator. So then I had to really say, okay, yes, there are times they have to repeat themselves, but for the most part, I understand. It's helped me. When I see motor delays and I see processing problems, I can advocate for my students in IEP meetings, even though they get frustrated with me at the school. Fast forward to beginning this course a few weeks ago, my assumption was that, of course, I would learn something new, but I felt I already knew a great deal about multicultural education and was confident I was doing everything I could as an educator to be inclusive. I soon learned they're reading a lot of course material, chapters and chapters, and listening to my classmates' pieces. There was a lot in our history about systemic racism that I didn't even know happened, was occurring, and continuing to occur. If I didn't know what happened with my extensive education and one master's degree, how could my students possibly know? So I've been filing away information to make sure I'm going to talk to my students about all perspectives when I share history in our social studies lessons. Armstrong stated in 2021, culturally responsive education, when done well, is designed to make all students feel they are a part of an educational community. This article in New America's 2020 guide had 8 competencies educators should encompass as multicultural educators. Since I only have 10 minutes on this video, I thought I'd focus on 5 that I think will have the most impact on my students. They are reflecting on my own cultural lens, drawing upon students' culture to shape curriculum and instruction, having high expectations for all students, recognizing and addressing bias in the system, and collaborating with families in the local community. First, considering drawing upon students' culture with curriculum, I think one of the best ways to showcase all of my students' unique identities is through children's literature. I believe in the transformative power of literature. We can engage in difficult subject matter through stories. Children connect to characters in stories, making meaning of the world around them. Rudin Sims Bishop had a beautiful analogy, I loved this article, talking about the power of literature to be windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. She spoke about the importance of diversity in children's literature so children could see characters like themselves, in essence, a mirror, a reflection of their lives. She also talked about the power of a window to look in on the lives of others, which really speaks to me how multicultural education is for all students to learn from one another. If students are only given a monocultural experience that the majority culture of Caucasians have, students only see stories like Caucasians and they won't grow. All of our students in marginalized communities, again, won't feel seen or valued, or that their experience is worthy of anything. They don't even matter. Bishop stated, "We are realistic enough to know that literature, no matter how powerful, has its limits. It won't take the homeless off the streets. It won't feed the starving of the world. It won't stamp out the scourge of drugs. It could, however, help us understand each other better by helping us change our attitudes towards difference. When there are enough books available, they can act as both mirrors and windows for our children. They will see we can celebrate our differences and similarities because together they will make us all human." That comes from a Bishop's article in 1990. Representation matters. Seeing yourself in a classroom matters. My classroom is very reflective of CCSD's racial demographics. 33% were Latino, 24% were Caucasian, 20% African American, 14% were Asian Pacific Islander, and 10% were multiracial. That's pretty close to what CCSD has. As such, the videos that I chose to show, the read alouds, bulletin boards, and pictures should reflect my students' cultures. And I know we can't find an exact percentage to match that, maybe, but I do intentionally augment the CCSD required curriculum with culturally relevant read alouds, creative flip books where we chorally read and process that information, and activities of celebration and understanding. Next is drawing upon my own cultural lens. And drawing on my own cultural lens is the hard work you have to do to unpack any stereotype, preconceived notion, limiting beliefs, and really wrestle to see where it's coming from and how you can change your perspective, attitudes, and behaviors. Considering the racial discrepancies in discipline, it's vital for me to ensure I'm using restorative disciplines, seeking education and understanding always with my students. As the School to Prison Pipeline article pointed out, 80% of educators are white females who, quote, may have less understanding about Black students and boys. Cultural stereotypes about African Americans being inherently criminal or suspect can condition a teacher to react more harshly to a student who's acting out. And that's from the Hain 2014 article. And that really makes me think, am I doing that? If I am doing that, what am I going to do differently so that I make sure all students are being treated with the same level of fairness, that I'm seeking understanding for what's going on behind what they're doing. Children don't act out to be mean or terrible. Children are inherently good people. Adults are the ones that get a little more messed up. But if I seek what's going on behind it, that's that restorative discipline piece and seeking relationship over a punitive. High expectations for also students. The quote from the Yanto Bodhi text says, students perform in ways that teachers expect. That is, student performance is based on both overt and covert messages from teachers about students' worth, intelligence, and capability. So this is the Pygmalion effect, obviously, right? It's been well documented, and to me, it just makes sense. As a parent, I spoke belief into my children, and I continue to help them reframe negative mindsets. I believe in growth mindset, but I also think our culture is filled with critical voices. Some come internally, some come from other peers, and some come from parents. I might be overcompensating, as I did not grow up in house with a growth mindset. My parents believe pushing me to greatness would come through criticism. They thought it would lead me to be more resilient, tough. We know students in marginalized communities in particular have Caucasian teachers that have already pre-classified them and set the bar low, that they need tier 3 support. They will not have parent support at home. They will not succeed. I speak belief into all my students and to work hard to build positive relationships, particularly with my marginalized students. One of my students, Zara, an African-American female, came to me as a pastoral student. She was gone for a few months and came back to our school and got put in my classroom. She had a lot of avoidance behavior. She didn't want to work. She would go under her desk because she didn't have the background of what to do. She was scared, so she'd already given up on herself. I continued to speak belief, letting her know I was not giving up on her, that she could do it. She's not on grade level, but she's made great strides in her reading and writing. I found for her, working with whiteboards, gave her the opportunity to make mistakes, but quickly erase them without the punitive grades. This is where she made growth. Family involvement. Before retiring from higher education and student affairs work, I spent 4 years at UNLV building the parent involvement program, starting with orientation and creating a parent council. There were only a few across the country doing this work. I made intentional effort to connect with colleagues from UCLA, USC, and the premier parent program led by Marjorie Savage at the University of Minnesota. I had experience also as a parent of 2 CCSD students, but despite my level of education, I found myself frustrated with my children's homework, in particular math, the new mathematic methods. When I began teaching first grade 2 years ago, it was my big goal to build strong family relationships, demonstrating care for the whole family, including the student, making connections and creating partnerships to help our students. I created a YouTube channel where I do 1-minute videos with a phonics focus and a mathematics focus, explaining the strategies we're using. I encourage parent volunteers and found out my school allowed parents to come once a month, not being badged. This loophole, because the process of fingerprinting and the expense of the process was not great at building our family engagement. It hindered it. So the last day of school, I actually had 6 families working with their children on curriculum in our room. I was really happy with that. With all my communication in person and through Class Dojo, typed, I never wanted to come across as condescending, but to be seen as an ally and a partner in education. The quote from the Maroon 2021 article is telling. Although most pre-K to 12 schools claim to value, quote, parent engagement, the value of this engagement tends to be superficial or ill-conceived, revealing an overarching perspective that families of color and their children are deficient in social and cultural capital. With a high percentage of parents of color in my classroom, I knew it was important to build trusting relationships first. They had to trust me. Low involvement due to large mistrust of government entities, marginalization, and negative attitudes toward any language other English was preventing a lot of things. So I had to first create community. The DeGanto article in 2007, she wrote about Latino families, stating Latino parents actively participate in schools where there's a positive and consistent focus of their own culture. DeGanto really talked about when you know families, they feel more comfortable coming to the school building and will probably return. That was echoed in the McDonald 2015 article, where they focused on building relationships with what they called a FAST program, had culturally trained staff, and the goal was not to talk about academic expectations, but to build community. And I think this is where most teachers and administration miss a beat. They want to jump straight to the facts with parents. Relationship building should come first. A really great doctoral research by Carla Rodriguez in 2016, her dissertation talked about family involvement in marginalized groups to help close literacy gaps with first grade students. This was in San Diego, and at this school, 50% of the students were not on grade level with their literacy. So they created a family engagement night where parents were given scaffolds to help their children to write their family history book. Then over spring breaks, family were given take-home kits with thought-provoking questions for conversations, with the idea that a lot of literacy is built through speaking and listening skills. And then also they were given literacy games in both English and Spanish. And parent feedback was positively, overwhelmingly amazing about the learning, about the writing process, and understanding how they could partner in literacy. Last, recognizing and addressing bias in the system. This is from the Netflix documentary in 2018. Wealth is where past injustices breed present suffering. When we learn about the civil rights movement in African American history, there's a bias and narrative taught to students about white saviors like President Lincoln coming in and freeing the slaves. There's little to no education other than the basics of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech and segregation shared. I think we can teach even the tiniest humans about systemic racism and bias system. I think they can learn about history. Actually, I know they can, because I've taught about marginalized communities, how we still haven't fixed these wrongs today. I already alluded to bias within our discipline system, but I think addressing teacher bias and prejudices overall is vital to a healthy multicultural identity in our schools. I know there's a lot of memes and joke related to student names, and I will admit I learned a lot about the naming processes within cultures I didn't know. I always felt it vital to learn how to pronounce student names, but I think you can take it a step further by shutting down teacher jokes that are racist. I really like this quote from the Maroon 2018 article. Self-reflection and critical engagement enable one to understand the history of resistance of communities of color to the dominant culture by giving their children unique names, names connected to their family history and cultural backgrounds. I know all this information is worthless without action. Growing stagnant in any profession can harm productivity, and with those in businesses, I'm sure can harm profits. I'm not creating widgets, and I'm not increasing profit margins. I'm shaping young minds. To me, it's one of the most valuable and exciting jobs in the world. I help create a better world for our children where they're seen, valued, challenged, and loved.